Something in you believed something was possible, and then it stopped being possible, or at least that is what the evidence has been telling you. Not all at once. These things rarely end dramatically. More often, they end the way a fire ends. Not with a great blaze, not with a moment you can point to and say that was when it went out, but with a slow diminishing, less warmth, less light. And then one day you look at the place where the fire was, and you realize it has been cold for a long time, and you cannot quite remember when that happened. Maybe the thing that went quiet was a belief about your life, something you were certain was God-given, something that arrived with such clarity that you never questioned it. A calling, a direction, a sense that your life was being shaped towards something specific, something that mattered, something that had your name on it. And for a while, that certainty was so strong it carried you through seasons that should have broken you. But the seasons stretched. The timeline extended well past every expectation. And eventually the certainty went quiet too. Maybe what went quiet was a dream. Not the vague kind, the specific kind. The kind that had details. The kind you could picture with your eyes closed. A marriage that would be different. A family that would be healed. A business built on something you believed. A ministry that would reach people no one else was reaching. You did not dream it casually. You gave it years. You gave it sacrifice. You gave it the kind of sustained faith that only comes from believing something deeply. And the dream, as far as you can tell, is over. Maybe what went quiet was a part of yourself, the version of you that expected God to show up. The version of you that could read a promise in Scripture and feel it land, feel it actually touch the specific shape of your need. That version of you still shows up, still participates, still knows all the right words. But somewhere behind the participation, something has gone very still. You are present in all the right places and absent in the one place that matters most, the interior room where faith actually lives. Maybe what went quiet was a relationship. Not just the external fact of it, but the version of it you believed was possible. The restoration you prayed for, the healing you were certain was coming, the bridge you spent years building that the other person never crossed. You stopped praying for it not because you stopped caring, but because you could not survive continuing to hope for something that showed no sign of arriving. So you set it down, quietly, without ceremony, without a moment of formal conclusion. You just stopped picking it up every morning the way you used to. You do not call any of this loss. That word feels like giving up. So you have given it other names. You call it maturity. You call it discernment. You call it not getting your hopes up anymore, which feels very close to wisdom but lives very close to grief. And in the place where the fire was, where the dream was, where the certainty was, there is a silence that you have learned to carry without showing anyone how heavy it is. I see the difference between what you call it and what it actually is. And I need you to hear something today that I am not saying to comfort you through a hard season. I am saying it because it is the most accurate description of reality available to you right now. And reality is the only ground on which either of us can do anything useful together. What looks dead to you is not dead to me. I want you to understand this not as an encouraging phrase designed to get you through a hard season, but as a description of how I actually work, what I am actually like, what I am actually like, what I am actually like, what I have always done, what I will always do. Because it is not a strategy I employ occasionally, but the fundamental nature of who I am. I am the God who calls into being things that do not yet exist. I am the God who names the end from the beginning. I am the God who looked at formless void and darkness and spoke, and there was light. I did not begin with what existed. I began with what I intended, and my intention always precedes what your eyes can see. The gap between what you see and what I am doing has never been evidence that nothing is happening. It has always been evidence that I am working in the unseen before I produce the visible. The bones were not assembled until I commanded it. The dove did not return with the olive branch until the waters had already begun to recede. The stone was not rolled away until the third day. Every great act in the history of my relationship with humanity has had a season of darkness before the breaking of light, not because darkness is the destination, but because I often save my best work for the moment when every human observer has concluded that there is nothing left. You are not in the absence of my movement. You are in the darkness before my next declaration, and I need you to stay present long enough to see what I am about to do. Let me show you what I have always done in exactly the place you are in right now. The prophet Ezekiel did not choose to go to the valley. The hand of the Lord was upon him, and the Spirit of the Lord set him down in the middle of it. He did not plan this visit. He was brought here. And when he arrived, what he found was not a battlefield mid-engagement. What he found was the aftermath of a catastrophe, so complete and so long past, that nothing remained. No flesh, no sinew, no memory of warmth. Only bones, dry bones, scattered across the valley floor in every direction, bleached by year upon year of open sun, stripped of everything that had ever made them living. The text is specific. They were very dry, not recently fallen, not freshly wounded, very dry. The language of Ezekiel 37 is the language of utter finality. This was the kind of scene where no experienced physician, no seasoned general, no pragmatic observer would have stood and said there is still hope here. There was nothing here. The valley was full of bones, and the bones had been bones for longer than hope typically survives. And God said to Ezekiel, "Son of man, can these bones live?" This question is extraordinary in its precision. Not, "Can you fix this?" Not, "Is there anything salvageable?" Not, "Can you help these people?" God looked at the totality of the impossibility and asked the question that cut to the absolute center of the entire situation. Can these bones die too? Live, and Ezekiel standing in the middle of it, looking at the scattered, sun-bleached, disconnected, very dry remains of what had once been an entire nation, gave the only honest answer available to him. "Sovereign Lord, you alone know." He did not pretend to see something he did not see. He did not perform faith by declaring breakthrough when his eyes were reporting complete devastation. He simply acknowledged the limits of his own perception and handed the question back to the one who asked it. He said essentially, "I cannot answer this, and I am not the right person to answer it. Only you know." That answer satisfied me, because I was not asking for Ezekiel's assessment. I was asking for his trust, his willingness to hold the question without collapsing it into despair or inflating it into wishful thinking, but to simply hold it open and say, "You alone know." That posture, that open-handed "I cannot see this, but I am still here" posture, is exactly the posture I was looking for. And when I found it in Ezekiel, I gave him the next instruction. "Prophesy to these bones. Tell them, hear the word of the Lord." Ezekiel spoke to bones. He did not speak to gathered people who could process the words and respond with conscious decisions. He did not speak to a crowd with ears and minds and the capacity for dialogue. He spoke to bones on a valley floor, which is the single most absurd assignment any prophet in the Old Testament ever received. And yet he obeyed. And as he spoke, there was a sound. The text says it was a rattling, not a resurrection, not yet. First, a rattling. The sound of disconnected things beginning to find their way back to each other. Bone to bone. Joint to joint. Structure beginning to reassemble itself out of what had been scattered. Then sinew came on them. Then flesh came on them. Then skin closed over them. All of them, the whole vast field, now covered in skin. A body. An army's worth of bodies lying there. And they had no breath. The form was there. The potential was there. But they were lying still. The structure was assembled, but the life had not yet arrived. And I said to Ezekiel, "Prophesy to the breath, not to the bones this time, to the breath itself. Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain, that they may live." And Ezekiel prophesied, and the breath came, and they lived, and they stood on their feet. A valley full of impossibly dry bones, and then breath, and then an army standing upright in the open air where only silence and scattered remains had been before. Here's what I said next, and I need you to receive this not as ancient history, but as a word spoken directly into the specific geography of your life right now. These bones are my people. They say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is gone, and we are completely cut off. Do you hear their self-assessment? They said our hope is gone. They said we are cut off. These were their own words about their own situation, an accurate description of the external evidence as they understood it, delivered as the final verdict on their future. And here is how I responded to that verdict. I gave them a counter-declaration. I spoke their future into a present that had not yet arrived. I did not negotiate with the verdict. I replaced it. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it. The bones did not believe their own resurrection was coming. They were bones. They had no expectation, no faith, no capacity for hope. The breath did not arrive because the bones were ready. It arrived because I commanded it. And this is the principle I need to become permanent in the way you understand how I work. Your revival does not require your hope to be at full strength. It requires mine. I am not waiting for your faith to reach a sufficient level before I speak into your valley. I am looking for Ezekiel's posture, the willingness to stand in the middle of the impossibility and say, you alone know. The willingness to speak when I say speak, even when the audience is bones. That is all I am looking for. The rest belongs to me. Your valley may look very different from the one Ezekiel stood in. The bones in your life may not be visible to anyone around you, the scattered remains of something no one else even knew you were building, or hoping for, or carrying. They may be the remnants of a marriage that felt like a calling before it ended, a relationship you gave years to, that you prayed over with genuine belief, that you sustained longer than most people would have because you were convinced restoration was coming. And then the ending came anyway, and what is left does not look like a valley of bones to anyone else. But to you, it is the most accurate image for what you are walking through. The scattered, sun-bleached remains of a future you were certain belonged to you. They may be the remains of a ministry that once had momentum, something that started as a genuine call for me, something that bore fruit early on and drew people in, and felt like the confirmation of everything you had believed about your purpose, and then went completely still. No explanation, no clear cause, just the slow withdrawal of what had been moving, until one day you looked at what was left and could not remember what life used to feel like in it. They may be the dried-out version of the faith you carried into adulthood, which somewhere along the way lost the moisture it had when it was young. Not a dramatic loss, not a crisis of intellect or a single unanswerable question, just the gradual quieting of what used to be immediate, the sense of presence that used to be reliably available, the intimacy that made Scripture feel personally addressed, the confidence that the God you were reading about was actively engaged with the specific shape of your life. And one day you looked at where that was and found that it had gone quiet in the same way a fire goes quiet. No single moment when it went out, just less and less warmth until the cold was just the permanent temperature. Whatever form your valley has taken, the condition is the same. Something that once lived is no longer living, at least as far as you can see. And I am speaking directly into that naming. I am not disputing the accuracy of your observation. Bones are dry, very dry, exactly as dry as you say they are. What I am disputing is the conclusion your observation has drawn from the evidence, because your observation is only capable of describing what exists. My perspective includes what I have already decided to do with what exists. I do not begin in the abundance. I begin in the valley. I do not begin with what is already alive. I begin with the bones. Because when the army stands, there will be no explanation available that does not include me. And my name on your resurrection is the very thing your valley has been making space for. There's a part of Noah's story that receives almost no attention, and it is the part that speaks most directly into the specific experience many of you are in right now. Everyone knows about the ark. Everyone knows about the flood. The extraordinary faith required to build a vessel in the absence of any visible reason to do so, because at that point in human history, it had never rained. The ground was watered by mist from beneath. Noah had no experiential frame of reference for what God was describing. He had never seen rain. He had certainly never seen a flood. And yet he built. For 100 years by some accounts he cut timber and hauled it and measured it and sealed it and shaped it into a vessel that his neighbors had no framework for understanding, because the category of boat did not meaningfully exist in the world they inhabited. He built on the word alone. And then the rain came, and the floods came, and the ark lifted off the ground. And every external assessment of Noah's project, every expression of skepticism, every voice of ridicule from people who watched him build and never understood why, was silenced by the arrival. But here's the part that matters most for you today, the part that rarely makes it into the version of this story that gets told on Sunday mornings. After 40 days and 40 nights of rain, the water covered everything. The ark was floating on an earth-covering ocean with no visible ground anywhere. And then it stopped raining, and Noah waited. The text says that after 40 days, 40 more days of waiting after the rain ended, Noah opened the window of the ark and sent out a raven. The raven flew back and forth until the water dried up. Then he sent out a dove. The dove found no resting place in return. Noah waited 7 more days and sent the dove again. It returned with a freshly plucked olive leaf. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove a 3rd time. This time it did not return. After all of this, the 40 days of rain, the 40 more days of waiting, the 3 sendings of the dove, Noah and his family remained in the ark while the earth slowly dried. It was the 1st day of the 1st month when the water had dried from the earth, and it was the 27th day of the 2nd month when the earth was completely dry. 57 days between the first appearance of dry ground and the moment God said, "Come out." 57 days of Noah seeing the dry land appearing and remaining in the ark, because God had not yet given the word. He could see the ground. He could smell the fresh air. He could observe that the conditions for leaving appeared to be present. And he remained. He waited for the word. I'm telling you this because some of you are in those 57 days. The flood has stopped. The worst of it is behind you. You can see signs that the earth is drying, small mercies, unexpected moments of clarity, quiet evidences that the devastation is receding. But you are still in the ark. You are still in the in-between, that profoundly disorienting space between the flood ending and God saying, "Come out," where every day feels like a kind of limbo that makes no sense to the person living. You survived. The waters are receding. Why are you still waiting? Why is the door still closed? Because I am the one who opens it. And I open it when the earth is fully prepared, not when the ground is partially visible, not when the conditions look approximately right, but when the full restoration has been established. Every day in the ark that feels like unnecessary waiting is a day of preparation in the earth below you. And then, when the earth was fully prepared, I said, "Come out of the ark." And Noah stepped out. And the first thing I did in that moment was make a covenant. A promise spoken over the whole earth. A declaration that what had just happened would never define the future in the same way again. And the sign of that covenant was placed in the sky, visible, recurring, permanent. Every time the rain clouds gather, the bow appears. Every storm, for the rest of human history, carries inside it the sign of my promise that the flood is not the final word. What looks finished to you, the life you had before the flood, the plans that were submerged, the future that went under with the rising water, I am preparing the ground on the other side. The dove is on its way back with the olive leaf. The earth beneath you is drying. The bow is already in the cloud. Waiting is one of the most underestimated forms of faithfulness. Not because waiting is passive. It is not. Waiting inside the ark while you can see the ground appearing, while every instinct says now, while the people around you may also be asking why the door is still closed. That waiting is an act of extraordinary and sustained trust. Noah had the physical ability to open the ark door himself. He had the experiential evidence that conditions were improving. The water was visibly receding. The ground was appearing. By every observable measure, the time to leave had arrived. And he remained. because he understood something essential about the nature of his relationship with the God who had spoken the entire flood into existence. The one who brought him through the water was also the one who would release him on the other side, and the timing of that release was not his to determine. That understanding, that my sovereignty over the when is as real as my sovereignty over the weather, is the thing that makes waiting an act of worship rather than an act of resignation. The timing of your release is not yours to determine. The earth below you is being prepared. The ground is drying. And when the word comes, and it will come, you will step out onto prepared ground into a season that was made for you, and you will build on it with a stability that would not have been available had you stepped out before I said go. There was a commander of the army of the king of Aram named Naaman. The text introduces him with a careful accumulation of credentials. He was great, he was honored, he was a man his king held in high regard. He was a mighty man of valor, and military victories he had won were attributed to divine intervention on his behalf. He had earned his reputation through genuinely consequential work, and he had leprosy. Not a small thing, not a condition that could be managed quietly or contained to one area of life. Leprosy in the ancient Near East was a comprehensive sentence: isolation, progressive degradation, the slow loss of everything that made a person's body their own. Naaman had it, alongside every credential and every honor and every victory his life had accumulated. The great man had an undeniable, unmanageable problem, and no human solution was available to him anywhere in Aram. In Naaman's household there was a young woman who had been taken captive from Israel during one of the raids and served as wife. And she said to her mistress, "This servant girl, this captive, this person with no political standing, no authority, no voice in that household beyond the labor she provided," she said, "if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." A servant carrying the one piece of information that could change everything. The person with the least visible power in the situation was the carrier of the word that would produce the healing. That is a pattern you should recognize, because I operate this way consistently. The wisdom for your moment of greatest need often arrives through the person you are least positioned to dismiss, least inclined to hear, least expecting to speak. The servant girl, the quiet voice, the source that does not match the scale of the problem. And Naaman listened. He went to his king. The king sent him to Israel with a letter and silver and gold and 10 sets of clothing, and he arrived at the king of Israel's palace. The king of Israel read the letter and tore his robes, because he interpreted the request as a political provocation, as a pretext for conflict that he would be held responsible. He could not see the path to the healing from where he was standing. He saw the impossibility and panic, but Elisha heard about it and sent word, "Have the man come to me and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and his chariots, the full display of his military standing, and he stopped at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger out to him, not Elisha himself, his messenger. And the messenger said, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored and you will be cleansed." That was the entire instruction. A river, a number, nothing more. And Naaman was furious. This is one of the most important moments in this story, because what Naaman did next is exactly what human beings do when the method of their healing does not match the expectation of what healing at that scale ought to look like. He went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel?" He had expected a dramatic encounter proportional to the significance of his need. He had come from a great distance. He had brought silver and gold. He was a man of standing. He expected the prophet to come out personally, to make a dramatic and visible gesture, to produce a healing that matched the magnitude of the disease and the magnitude of his reputation. And what he received was 7 dips in the Jordan, a river he considered inferior, a method he did not choose, an instruction that came through a messenger, not even through the prophet directly, The gap between what Naaman expected and what he was given was the gap between his pride and my method. And the question in that gap, the question that is also the question you may be sitting with in this season, was, will you obey the instruction as given, even when it does not match your expectation of how a healing of this magnitude should arrive? His servants came near to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says simply wash and be cleansed?" The wisdom he needed in that moment came from the people with the least standing in his company, and this time he listened. He went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, exactly as the man of God had said, and his flesh was restored and became clean. He came up from the river healed, not after the dramatic encounter he anticipated, not after the prophet waved his hand, after 7 ordinary, humble, obedient dips in a river he had considered beneath him, after the full completion of the specific, simple, apparently insufficient instruction he had been given. And Naaman returned to Elisha and stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel." He returned changed, not because of his credentials, not because of his silver and gold, not because his need had been proportional to the scale of the treatment, but because he went down into the river when it would have been easier and more dignified to go home. The 7th dip, the completion of the full instruction, that was where the healing was waiting. I need you to receive this. The method of your healing may not look the way you expected it to look. It may not come through the channel you anticipated. It may not arrive in the form that feels proportional to the significance of what you are asking for. The river may look ordinary. The instruction may feel beneath you. The number of dips may feel excessive when the first 6 produced nothing visible. The wisdom for the moment may come through the person with the least standing in your current situation, but the something greater was accomplished by something that looked like nothing. And what you come up from the water carrying is not the same as what you took in with you. Naaman's story carries one of the most practically important pieces of instruction in all of Scripture about the specific nature of healing and restoration. And it is this: my method of bringing about the impossible consistently requires the abandonment of the expectation that the method will look impressive. The mighty man expected the prophet to appear personally, to make a dramatic gesture, to produce a healing visibly proportional to the gravity of the situation and the significance of the man. And I gave him a river and a number and a messenger. The humility required to obey the instruction as given, without negotiating for a more dignified version, without routing the healing through the channels that matched his standing, was the act of faith that produced the healing. Pride is the thing that stands at the edge of the Jordan and says, "I can find a better river." Obedience is the thing that goes in anyway. And what obedience to the simple, specific, humble instruction produces is the healing that no elaborate, self-chosen alternative could have delivered. If you are at the edge of the Jordan right now, if you have been given an instruction that does not match the scale you expected, through a messenger you did not anticipate, go down into the river. The 7th dip is the one where your flesh is restored. Go down. Simon Peter had 2 conversations by fire that define the arc of his story, and the arc of what I do with failure. The first fire was in a courtyard in Jerusalem on the night of Jesus' arrest. A servant girl looked at Peter and said, "You also were with him, with the man from Galilee." And Peter said, in front of everyone present, "I do not know what you are talking about." He moved to the gateway, and another person saw him and said to those standing there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." And he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." After a little while, those standing nearby came up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." And he began to call down curses on himself and swear to them, "I do not know the man." And immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly 3 times, not once in a moment of careless confusion. 3 separate, increasingly emphatic denials, the final one punctuated with a curse, with the full weight of Peter's will behind the words. This was the man who had walked on water. This was the man to whom I had said, "You are the rock, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. This was the man who had left everything, fishing boat, nets, livelihood, family relationships, to follow me. And at the moment it caused something real, when the question came not from a powerful official, but from a servant girl by a fire. He denied knowing me 3 times, with increasing force, and then the rooster crowed. After the resurrection, after the empty tomb, after the locked room appearances, after I stood among them and breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit," Peter still did not know what to do with what he had done. The resurrection was real. The appearances were real. The forgiveness was presumably available. But the weight of the denial was heavier than any single event could lift, because shame does not respond to events. It responds to specific, intentional, targeted address. And Peter had not yet received that address. So he did what a person does when they no longer know what to do with who they are. He went back to what he understood before everything changed. "I am going out to fish," he said. Some of the disciples went with him. They fished all night and caught nothing. In the morning I was standing on the shore. I had built a fire. There were fish on it, and bread. They came in from the water, and I said, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." And they came, and they ate together. And when breakfast was finished, I turned to Simon Peter and I asked him a question. I asked it 3 times. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" 3 times. One for each denial. Not to humiliate him, not to make him publicly count what he had done, but to close every wound in the exact shape it had opened. Shame creates wounds through specific acts, and shame is dismantled through specific acts of restoration. I did not offer Peter a general amnesty and ask him to move on. I met him 3 times, one for each fire, one for each denial. And each time he answered, I gave him back his calling. "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And each time I answered, "Feed my sheep." The 3rd time I asked, the text says Peter was hurt because I had asked him a 3rd time. He was hurt because he understood exactly what the 3 questions were doing. He was being walked back through the 3 moments he most wanted to forget, and being asked to answer differently in each one, and the pain of that was real. And in that pain, with full awareness of what the 3 questions meant, he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And I said, "Feed my sheep." I did not give Peter back a reduced calling. I did not say, "You can still be useful but not in a leadership role." I did not say, "I forgive you, but the keys are going to someone more reliable." I gave him back the same commission I had given him before, not after a probationary period, not after he demonstrated over time that he had changed. Right there on the beach, over breakfast, before he had done a single thing to prove he had recovered. Because my commissions are not performance-based, they are grace-based. And what my grace gives, my grace can restore. I built that fire. I prepared that meal. I chose that shore. I was waiting for Peter when he came in from the water with his net. I had already planned every detail of the restoration before Peter had processed a single element of the failure. The calling was not revoked by what happened in the courtyard. The calling belongs to me, and I decide what becomes of it. The 2nd fire, my fire, on the shore, with bread already prepared and fish already cooking, was the fire that closed every wound the 1st fire had opened. Shame has no authority over what I have spoken over your life. Shame is the most persistent internal narrator most people will ever live with. It does not simply describe what happened. It extrapolates from what happened into what it means about who you are and what you can still become. Shame takes a specific event, a denial, a failure, an abdication of something you were committed to, and it uses that event to rewrite the entire story. It says, "This is what you really are. This is what you do when it matters. This is why the calling was misplaced in the first place." And it repeats this story so consistently, over so long a period of time, that what began as a narration of an event becomes a narration of an identity. You carry that story not because you chose to, but because you have not yet received the specific, targeted, wound-by-wound counter-address that dismantles it. General grace does not undo specific shame. That is why I did not offer Peter a general amnesty. I asked 3 questions by a fire, one for each fire, one for each denial. Specific shame requires specific restoration, and I know exactly where each wound was opened, and I meet it in the exact shape of its formation. There is a version of your own courtyard that you have been carrying, a specific act, a specific failure, a specific moment that shame has been using as the master narrative of who you are and what you are capable of. And you have been waiting for some internal resolution to arrive before you could return to the shore, waiting to feel worthy of the commission again, waiting to have demonstrated enough recovery to deserve the assignment. But I met Peter before the recovery was demonstrated. I met him on the shore, by my fire, over breakfast, before a single thing had changed, except that I showed up. I walked up to a man who had gone back to fishing because he did not know what else to do with who he was, and I gave back everything. Not performance-based restoration, grace-based restoration. And what my grace gives, shame does not have the authority to permanently withhold. The calling belongs to me. Shame does not have authority over what I have spoken. Failure does not have that authority. Only I decide the future of what I have declared over your life, and what I have spoken I do not unsay. Thomas was not present when I first appeared to the disciples after the resurrection. He arrived later to find the other 10 telling him what they had seen. The risen Lord, the wounds in the hands and side, the proof of what had seemed impossible. And Thomas said something that has followed him through 2,000 years of history as a mark of deficiency. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. I want you to hear what Thomas was actually doing. He was not being reckless or cynical or malicious. He was being a man whose hope had been completely shattered by the crucifixion, who had given everything genuinely and fully to following me, who had watched me arrested and tried and killed in the most public and humiliating imaginable. And now his 10 closest friends were telling him that everything he had witnessed, the arrest, the trial, the cross, the death, the sealed tomb, had been reversed, and he could not hold both realities at once. The grief of the past 3 days was too specific and too real to be dissolved by a second-hand report, however trustworthy the source. I will not believe was not a statement of stubborn atheism. It was a statement of a man in so much grief that he was protecting himself from the additional devastation of hoping in something that turned out not to be true. He had hoped before. He had invested fully in the narrative of a living Messiah, and the Messiah had died. He was not going to survive a second collapse of that magnitude. So he drew a very clear line. I will not believe without evidence. And I honored that. 8 days later, when Thomas was with the disciples in a room with locked doors, I came and stood among them. I appeared inside the locked room, and I spoke specifically to Thomas, not to the group, not with a general statement about the nature of faith, but directly and personally to the one who had drawn the line. Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. I had heard what Thomas said. I knew exactly where the line was, and I came to the specific location of his doubt and offered to meet it on its own terms. I invited him to do the very thing he had said was the condition for his belief. I showed him my hands. I showed him my side, and Thomas answered, "My Lord and my God." What I said next is for you and for every person who has ever found themselves in Thomas's position. Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. This is not a condemnation of Thomas. It is a recognition of 2 different kinds of faith. I did not rebuke Thomas for the kind of faith he had. I met him in it. Thomas went to India. By historical account, he carried the gospel to a subcontinent that none of the other apostles reached, and he died a martyr for the faith he expressed in that locked room. The man who said, "Unless I see, saw," and then spent the rest of his life telling people who had not seen that the seeing was real. His doubt was not the end of his story. It was the address I came to find him at. I come to the address of your doubt. Whatever room you have locked yourself into, whatever door you have closed, because the grief of what you have already hoped for and lost is too heavy to open again. I come through locked doors. I appear in the room where faith has gone still, and I invite you to put your finger here to see, to encounter me in the exact place where your certainty ran out. There is a difference between doubt and disbelief that I need you to understand, because how you understand that difference will determine whether you remain in the room or leave it. Doubt is a live wire. It is still connected, still searching, still conducting toward the place where it can complete the circuit and find the ground it needs. Disbelief has cut the wire and put it down entirely. Doubt says, I cannot see how this is true, but I have not left. Disbelief says, I've made my determination, and the determination is final. These two states feel similar from the inside, but they are profoundly different in their relationship to what I can do in them. Doubt creates the conditions for encounter. Disbelief forecloses it. And the reason Thomas's story matters for you is not that he doubted, it is that he doubted and remained. He was in the room. He was with the other disciples. He was present in the community of people who had seen what he had not seen, even while he could not hold what they were telling him. His presence in that room was the posture that made the 8 days later possible. I came through the locked door because there was someone inside the room I was coming to find. Many of you are in a version of those 8 days. You have heard the reports, the testimonies, the promises, the declarations that what seemed impossible has been reversed, and you have been unable to hold them at the level of personal belief because the grief of what you have hoped for and lost before is too specific and too heavy to lift with someone else's experience of resurrection. You are not cynical. You have not left the room. You are grieving. You are protecting yourself from the additional devastation of hoping in something that might not arrive. I am not asking you to manufacture certainty you do not have. I am asking you to remain in the room, to stay present, to continue showing up in the community where the reports are being given, even while you cannot fully receive them, because the 8 days will pass, and I will come through the door. And what I say when I arrive will be addressed to you specifically, not to the group, not to the general situation, but to the exact location of your particular doubt. I know where the wound is. I am already on the way to the room. Stay present. I come through locked doors, and I always know exactly where the wound is. The book of Job opens with a man who has everything, and that description is not incidental to the story. It is the essential setup for what makes the story devastating. He was blameless and upright, a man who feared God and turned away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and a very great household. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. The text establishes all of this with precision, because the specific scale of what is about to be lost is essential to understanding the specific scale of what is about to be restored. In a single day, raiders took his oxen and donkeys. Fire fell from the sky and consumed his sheep and the servants tending them. Another raiding party took his camels, and a wind struck the 4 corners of the house where his children were gathered, and the house collapsed, and all of his sons and daughters were dead. One messenger after another, each arriving before the previous one had finished speaking, each delivering news that would individually have been catastrophic, and together constituted the total demolition of everything he had built. And Job's response was to tear his robe, shave his head, fall to the ground, and worship. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all of this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. And then, in the second wave, his health went. He was afflicted from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head with painful sores. He sat among ashes and scraped himself with broken pottery. His wife looked at him in the ash heap and said, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." And his 3 friends came and sat with him in silence for 7 days and 7 nights, because they saw that his suffering was very great. The 7 days of silence were the most useful thing they did for him. When they opened their mouths, they began to explain, "God does not allow the innocent to suffer like this. Therefore you must have sinned." The math only works one way. They were confident in their theology, and they were wrong. Job refused their framework. Not because he had answers, he had none. He had raw, honest, unpolished questions directed straight at me without the protection of theological performance or the comfort of managed language. He said, "Let me present my case before God." He said, "Even if he kills me, I will hope in him." And here is the moment that should permanently change the way you understand honesty in your relationship with me. When I finally spoke from the whirlwind, the first thing I said to Eliphaz was this: "I am angry with you and your two friends because you have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Job has." The theologically confident, systematically correct, well-reasoned friends were wrong. Job, the one in the ashes, the one with the raw questions, the one whose prayers sounded like accusations, had spoken what was right about me, because Job was honest, and his honesty was directed at me. And I honor honesty directed at me even when it arrives from the ash heap in broken, grieving language. My answer to Job was not an explanation. I never told him about the conversation that preceded his suffering. I gave him no accounting for the sequence of events, no justification of my methodology, no divine apology for the scale of what had been allowed. What I gave him was a presence. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Who set its measurements? Do you know who stretched a measuring line across it? Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? Who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God? Not cruel, vast, not distancing, revealing. I was showing Job that the God who allowed the suffering was the same God who designed the morning star and named the constellations and set the boundaries of the sea, and taught the eagle where to build its nest on the high rock, and counted every feather on the wing of the hawk. And in the presence of that God, in the experience of that overwhelming, incomprehensible vastness, Job's response was not defeat. It was encounter. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. He moved from information about me to direct experience of me. And that experience was the turning point, not because the experience explained anything, but because it was more than explanation. It was me. I want you to sit with Job in the ash heap for a moment before I tell you what came after it. Not as an exercise in suffering, but because the specific texture of what Job experienced in that place is something that happens to people and is almost never spoken about in the settings where it needs to be heard most. Job's friends sat in silence with him for 7 days, and then they began to explain, and their explanations, delivered with genuine concern and theological confidence, made the suffering heavier rather than lighter, because they assumed a cause they could not verify and imposed a logic that did not apply. Job had to hold the weight of his own suffering while simultaneously holding the weight of being misunderstood by the people who were physically closest to him. That combination, the loss and the loneliness of having the loss explained incorrectly by the people who stayed, is one of the specific textures of grief that can make a season feel completely isolating even when other people are present. If you have been in a season where the people around you have tried to explain what you're going through with more confidence than the situation warrants, if you have had to receive their frameworks while knowing internally that the framework simply does not fit your experience, then you know the ash heap in a way that goes beyond the circumstance. I came to Job in the whirlwind while he was still in it, not after he had worked his way through it. And what I gave him was not an explanation. It was presence. Vast, incomprehensible, overwhelming presence. And in the encounter with that presence, Job moved from information about me to actual experience of me. And the experience was the turning point. And then I restored him. Not partially. Not enough to make him functional again. The Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends, not after he had presented a complete theological defense of my actions, not after he had resolved every question in his mind, but after he had done the specific and costly thing of praying for the very friends whose explanations had made his suffering worse. And what followed the restoration was specific and total. The Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before: 7 sons, 3 daughters, 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 donkeys. Twice, not equivalent, not replacement. Twice. And the book of James, written centuries later, still referencing the story, describes Job's experience with these words. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy, and what the Lord's purpose finally produced was double what had been taken. I am not the God of diminished returns. I am not the God of at least you survived. I am not the God of managed grief and adjusted expectations and the wisdom of learning to want less. I am the God who takes the total demolition, the complete stripping, the ash heap, the broken pottery, the silence of friends who meant well and got it wrong, and rebuilds it at twice the scale. The enemy's intention in every act of stripping is reduction. My intention in every act of restoration is multiplication. The man in the ash heap became the man who received double, and the ash heap is not the final chapter. So hear me today, not as a message you have encountered before in a form similar to this, but as words spoken with precision into the geography of your specific valley, your specific ark, your specific courtyard fire, your specific ark room, your specific ash heap. I am not speaking in generalities. I am speaking to the exact conditions you are in right now. If your valley is full of dry bones, the scattered, sun-bleached remains of what you once believed was possible, I am the God who speaks to bones and they assemble. I am the God who commands breath into bodies that have stopped breathing. I am the God whose declaration over your valley is not "this is unfortunate," but "this is the location of my next great act." The bones are about to rattle. The breath is being commanded. The army is going to stand on the ground where only silence existed before. If you are still in the ark, watching the water recede, seeing small signs of hope, but remaining in the in-between place where the door is still closed, the ground beneath you is being made ready. Every day that feels like unnecessary delay is a day of preparation in the earth you are about to walk on. The dove is on its way back with the olive leaf. The earth is drying. The bow is already in the cloud, and the word to come out is coming. If you are standing by the fire on the shore, carrying the weight of your own courtyard, carrying the memory of a specific act of failure that shame has used to rewrite your identity and revoke your calling, I have built my own fire on the shore. I have prepared the meal. I'm asking you the question that closes every wound shame has opened. The calling is not revoked. I have not changed my mind about you. What I spoke over your life before the courtyard still stands. Feed my sheep. If you are in the locked room, doors closed, unable to hold what others are telling you, I come through locked doors. I come to the room where you are still present, even though you are uncertain. I come to the specific address of your specific doubt, and I invite you to put your finger here, to see, to encounter me in the place where your certainty ran out. My Lord and my God. That is where the locked room ends. If you are in the ash heap, if the demolition has been total, if what you are left with is fragments of a life that used to be whole, I answer with presence when explanation is insufficient. I know the precise count and specific weight of everything that was taken from you, and I am the God who restores with interest, not equivalent, not consolation. Double.ai. What looks dead to you is not dead to me. The valley is not the ending. It is the location of my next breath. The ark is not permanent. The earth beneath you is drying. The Jordan is not too ordinary a river for the healing I have prepared. The courtyard fire does not define the shore fire. The locked room does not have a door I cannot open. The ash heap is not the final chapter of any story I am writing. I breathe into valleys and armies stand. I open ark doors onto prepared ground. I send a mighty man into the ordinary river, and he comes up with flesh like a young child. I build breakfast fires on empty shores for people who came back to what they knew before everything changed. I walk through locked doors to find the one who drew the line and offered to meet it on its own terms. I restore the man in the ash heap with double what the stripping took. I have not finished with what you thought was finished. The silence you have been living in is not my silence. It is the silence of the interval, the same silence that filled the valley before the rattling began, the same silence that filled the ark during the 57 days, the same silence that filled the shore before I lit the fire. My silence is never empty. It is loaded. It is full of what I am preparing just below the surface of what you can see. And every act of faithfulness you have performed in that silence, every morning you got up and continued to function even though the fire was cold, every time you showed up, even though the certainty was gone, every day you stayed in the room, even though the doors were locked, every one of those acts has been received. I have watched every single one. I have not missed a day. You are not at the end of a story. You are in the darkest paragraph before the chapter turns. And I am the one who turns chapters. I am the God of Ezekiel's valley, and Noah's dove, and Naaman's river, and Peter's shore, and Thomas's locked room, and Job's double portion. What I have started in your life I complete. What I have spoken over your life, I fulfill. What looks dead to you has never, for a single moment, been dead to me. The bones are about to rattle. What I breathe into does not stay dead. Amen. If something in this message reached the specific shape of what you are carrying right now, if one of these valleys is yours, if one of these fires is the fire you have been sitting beside, type "not dead" in the comments below. I want you to say it. I want you to choose the language of God's assessment over the language of your valley's verdict. Type "not dead" and watch what begins to move in the part of you that has been very quiet for a very long time.